Hi everyone, welcome to DocFest. I hope you're enjoying yourselves. I'm Nigel Fisher from the DocFest team, here to just quickly introduce this talk. This is a little bit of a personal thrill for me, having been a bit of a fan of this man's music for a number of times, having bounced to many performances in Sheffield over the years. So it's really great to be able to welcome Rodney with a slightly different hat on this time to talk about his documentaries and his career. I'd also like to welcome Jaimie D'Cruz, the Creative Director of Acme Films that Rodney works with closely. And also I'd like to welcome Lawrence Lartey, who will chair this session. I'm sure it'll be a super interesting conversation. Rodney will talk about the documentaries he's making. Jaimie will talk about the work that they're doing. And there'll be a sort of focus on question of diversity around the industry, why we're still lacking different voices and faces on screen. So over to you guys. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. Welcome to everyone. It's lights on me, I can't really see many faces, but it feels like there's a good vibe in here. Would really encourage you, as we're having this conversation, to think about questions at the end. You've got two great guys here who've got a wealth of knowledge and experience. So it'd be really good if you utilise the time at the end. So we will be putting aside some time for Q&A. Welcome to Rodney P Talks Beats, Bass and Docs. Really short intros because you're going to find out about the work of Rodney and Jaimie as this session goes on. I'm Lawrence Lartey, as Nigel said, I'm going to be chairing this. I've done a little bit of work with these guys before, hip-hop documentaries, and I'm about to start a job at Ravensbourne University as a creative director, so that's going to be the sort of intersection between education and TV and entertainment. But without further ado, let's get into it. So, Rodney, welcome. First time at DocFest?
First time at DocFest, yeah. Glad to be here. So far, so good.
And Jaimie, you're a seasoned...
Yeah, I've been here a few times.
Good. Okay, so if you don't know about the work of Rodney P, you're going to find out about his TV work, but we're going to show you a bit about what he does best.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, Rodney, tell us about your earliest musical memories.
Earliest musical memories. I guess my first musical memory really had more to do with dance than rapping and hip-hop. Me and a group of my friends when I was in primary school, we won the Metropolitan Police disco dancing competition. True story. So we had on like red, white and blue T-shirts with tassels and leg warmers and a disco dance.
I can't picture that.
Yeah, that was kind of the beginning. But then I was the youngest in my family, so I never had control of the radio knob. So I was always listening to what my brothers, my sister or my mum was listening to. So
Which was
reggae, funk and soul, a bit of lovers rock, a bit of Al Green, a bit of Jim Reeves that my mum used to like back in the day, and that's really where it started. And then with the beginning of pirate radio, I guess all of this new music started to come in. You know, it was kind of around there. It was also Top of the Pops. Seeing the Sugar Hill Gang on Top of the Pops was my first introduction to hip hop. And it really had an effect. But even after seeing that, it was a few years before hip-hop started to really flourish in the country and started to be introduced as a culture and a style of music. But the Sugar Hill Gang was definitely a big part of what got me wanting to be involved.
Yeah, and like...
Actually, also,
go on.
just to blow my horn again, I also won the Rotary Club of Battersea poetry competition. Yeah, so I was always a fan of words and wordplay. So again, that's why the Sugar Hill Gang kind of resonated, because it was like, ooh, that's something I could get with.
You're going to find out a lot about Rodney's past.
I'm going to be straight and honest with you today, and I'm going to give you some real insights, telling you.
So, you know, nowadays, grime, hip-hop, it's commercial, it's in our charts. A lot of us in this room will know a lot about the artists, but it wasn't always like that. And when did you realise that hip-hop was really taking off in the UK?
Again, Top of the Pops would have had a big part, and TV in general. So there were things like the Tony Basil show that used to come on BBC Two, and they would have body poppers and break dancers on there. And then Jeffrey Daniels from Shalimar was again on Top of the Pops, and it was a Shalimar record they were promoting, but he was on there on his own, and he did some body popping moves, and the first time we saw the moonwalk, long before Michael Jackson did it. And then of course there's the Malcolm McLaren Buffalo Girls video. That video really is what cemented for a lot of people of my generation that we have to find out what this is and how do we get down. Like, definitely want to be part of that. Made our way to Covent Garden, where hip-hop culture in London was flourishing. It was flourishing all over the country, but that was the epicenter in London, you know? So, yeah, Malcolm McLaren had a big part to do with it, absolutely. And again, them days, it was more about hip-hop as a culture rather than just rapping. It was all of it. I was a body popper and a break dancer, and I used to write graffiti, and I used to do all of that stuff, and I wasn't very good at any of that stuff. And rapping hadn't really taken a hold yet. It was more about electro music, the Johnson Crew and Planet Rock and doing that stuff, you know? But yeah, that's where it began.
And you talk about the culture, and that the sort of early stages was very much American culture, wasn't it?
Very much.
You guys as London Posse turned that on its head because you were rapping in like UK accents. Yeah. And how were you received when you started rapping in your sort of British black accent? For
me, I was like everyone else. Like we heard hip hop music and we emulated it. So I started rapping with a fake American accent I thought I sounded like I was from New York, but probably very, strange accent. And then I went to America. And I was rapping with my cousins and getting no real response because I probably wasn't very good. And then I would say, excuse me, mate, do you know where the local shop is? And people would lose their minds. Like, this black guy with this, where are you from? Like, and it
Bingo, you're like.
Yeah, it quickly became apparent that actually using your own accent had more impact. And then as well, growing up in London as part of the reggae music scene and the dancehall scene, within dancehall music at that time, sounds like Saxon Sound, people like Tenor Fly and Tipper Irie, they had this thing where we're UK blacks, we do this reggae music, we do dancehall, but we're not Jamaican, and there was a divide between traditional Jamaican sounds like Coxsone and the young English sounds like Saxon and Young Lion. And we kind of took that mentality and applied it to hip-hop, that we have to tell our own stories and use our own voices. And initially, it wasn't that popular with the hip-hop scene. Like, we don't want to hear that hip-hop's supposed to sound American. Like we were putting UK accents in, and we were using a lot of reggae music within our music because that's what we grew up listening to. And we figured if we're going to make hip-hop, it can't just be James Brown breaks. I love James Brown, by the way, but it can't just be James. We need to use some of the stuff that we grew up with. But it wasn't initially accepted. I mean, London Posse, we started out on tour with Big Audio Dynamite, which was Mick Jones from The Clash's new group with Don Letts. And that audience was really receptive. Like I guess they were more used to hearing those accents in the music. But the hip-hop scene initially really didn't like us. They really didn't like us.
And are there any assumptions when you tell people you're a rapper? Do they?
Yeah, most people assume I don't have a real job. You say I'm a rapper, and there's a blank stare, and they go, "Oh, peace," or like, you know what I mean, like something like that. But they don't assume you have a real job. And yeah, I mean, I've worked really hard at my job. Over the years, I've put in a lot of graft, done a lot of grunt work to be a rapper and to be able to say that's my career. But still, even to this day, a lot of people just don't take it particularly seriously.
Do you still class yourself? Because you're doing so many different things now.
I do a lot of stuff, but first and foremost, I'm a hip-hop kid. And everything that I've done subsequently, all this TV stuff, the radio stuff, it comes from the fact that I was doing this hip-hop stuff. The hip-hop stuff is what opened the gateway for me to come and do all of this stuff. So I'll forever be a hip-hop kid, for sure, even though I've stopped being a kid many moons ago.
But you are like Benjamin Button, because as you get older, you get younger.
I mean, I see a lot of the old footage and the old pictures, and I look at me with the sideburns and the moustache, and yeah.
Good. To move on over to Jaimie, I just have to say before we get into it with Jaimie, I'm very lucky because this guy gave me my break in the media industry. I used to bug him around.
He gave me my break too, so salute Jaimie.
About 22 years ago, I used to, not even emails, I used to write letters and post them to Touch magazine because I wanted to be involved. And for a year, nothing, he wouldn't respond. And then all of a sudden, I remember getting a response. And here we are. So Jaimie, how did you get started in the creative industries?
Well, it was through Touch, the magazine I ran, which was basically a fanzine, really, is the best word for it. And in those far-off pre-internet days, when the only way to really know about new, particularly black music, because it wasn't being played on Radio 1 or Capital, so the only way to really find out about it was pirate radio. And Touch came out of Kiss FM, which was a pirate, and they had this magazine because they went off air, long story, but to stay in touch with their huge fan base while they were off air trying to become legal, they started a magazine, which I then kind of ran for them. And then when they became legal, they closed the magazine down, so I carried it on as Touch. So that was really my first role in, I guess, the media. And it was very much, it was us doing what we want to do. So we didn't have anyone to answer to, except for, I guess, the fans and the readership. So we were very much led by, I think we had a slightly evangelical mission. We sort of felt we had this knowledge that we wanted to impart, and the thing that made us quite distinctive, because there were some quite established black music magazines, Echoes and Blues and Soul, that had been around since the 60s, and they were good and they were established, but they were quite professional. They were professional journalists, and we weren't. So to write for Touch, as you found out, you didn't have to know anything other than
I was far from professional.
You had to know about the scene, the music, the artists. You basically had to have a viewpoint and something to add, and if you did, you would be very much welcome in. So most of our writers, in fact, in the early days, were basically all the guys from the record shops. So you were on a pirate station, you ran a record shop, we had a lot of distributors writing for us because they were like the front line. So in the record industry, the A&R people, we saw them as like, they were the lazy ones. They kind of picked up people that when it was obviously going to blow. But you'd have all these guys on the front line that were like people like Trevor Nelson, whose job in those days, when he was known to us as Trevor Madhaz, he was going to the warehouse, working out what's going to sell, selling it to the shops. So we had those kind of people working for us, and that was my introduction to the media.
And is it true that Touch was W.H. Smith's most shoplifted magazine?
I don't know whether to be proud or embarrassed about. Yeah, basically because we started as a free magazine and distributed it ourselves. We would go out and go to all the nightclubs, go to the record shops, and then it started to grow, which is really good because there was such a paucity of information about, particularly American music, but also British homegrown black music. So the magazine grew, and what we found was that in order to get out of London, we had to start charging for the magazine, which we didn't really want to do, but so the magazine had to grow. It did grow a bit, but then we couldn't get beyond a certain stage because W.H. Smith said that they just couldn't handle it because they'd put it in all the shops and they'd all get nicked. So.
Not guilty. So people talk about you and refer to your career, and a lot of people know you from Touch, but they also know you from your Oscar-nominated work, Exit Through the Gift Shop, with Banksy. Are you Banksy?
Lawrence, how long you know me?
So a lot of people talk about that, and we'll have a little clip and a little...
You didn't answer the question, Jaimie.
Oh, let's roll the clip.
Just a reminder, I'm sure there's going to be loads of questions about that after, so save them, jot them down now, and we'll come back to that. So how did you meet Rodney, Jaimie?
I actually met Rodney originally because I think your older brothers, Jeff and William, were friends with my younger cousins. So yeah, basically Rodney was like one of the young kids that I would see him around at things. I
would have been like 15, 16 that time.
Yeah, and in a funny way, our worlds were quite small then, weren't they? So you'd know people from raving, from clubs, parties, that kind of thing. And then I heard about London Posse, and by this time when I was running Touch magazine, and I think it was when How's Life in London, which there was an excerpt in the first clip from. And one thing actually just that I think is really interesting about that particular music video is that when you look at it now, it looks like it could have come out 2 years ago. I mean, that's what grime music videos are like. And it was, I guess at the time, it just felt so fresh. You've got like 8 guys just all shouting at the camera with hoodies up and bellies up. You know, it's just, it had that freshness, that energy. And also, of course, as Rodney explained, the fact that they were rhyming in their own accents was quite, it's quite unique. So I think, so we did a cover story about Rodney and Bionic. But also there was particularly with regard to documentaries, which is, I guess, something that worth mentioning is that there was a legendary documentary called Bad Meaning Good that was made in 1987, so this was years before. And I remember as a teenager watching this documentary and being just blown away, because it was, it was called Open Space, I think. It was BBC Two. Yeah. And ironically, when there weren't that many channels, things that would now seem very marginal and might go out on a channel you've never heard of in the middle of the night, that went out on BBC Two at sort of 8 o'clock on a Wednesday or something, and it was a half-hour doc about hip-hop that Rodney was in, and it was presented by Tim Westwood, and it just felt like it was mainstream because it was on the BBC. The BBC had a documentary about this well, so that's where I probably first heard about Rodney.
Cool. And Ronnie, you were just saying you're many things now. It's not just a rapper, but you've managed to cross over into TV. How did that happen?
It kind of started as an artist, so it would be about doing interviews for TV shows, and then, having a little success. So then you become a talking head. Like, so now I'm being interviewed to speak about other topics on other people's shows. And then a big part of it was Jaimie. Jaimie invited me to come and do, at first, really small things and being a talking head and contribute to his shows. And it was really, we did a series of shorts about the carnival. It was the stuff we did like 3 or 4 short documentaries about the carnival. And that was really where it started for me. And also, like, I'd always had an interest in documenting these stories. I always felt like we're underrepresented. And like, we had that attitude, even as in London Posse, we had that attitude like, we're important, we need more room. And Jaimie was offering that. He was already doing that in the other stuff he was doing. And then he gave me an opportunity to come in and do a doc. And again, I have to thank him, because it was something I wanted to do and had no clue how I was going to be able to do it. And Jaimie extended that invite, and here we are.
And you talk about underrepresentation, and I'm sure it's going to come up during the time in Sheffield and various panels. When you were growing up, who were the people you looked at as pioneers on TV? Was there anyone you sort of really affiliated to and thought, that person inspires me, I want to be like that?
Honestly, not really, Bill. I don't remember seeing many people that looked and sounded like me on the TV when I was growing up. Yeah. There was Love Thy Neighbour, or something like that.
Yeah.
Or there was a time in the late 80s when Channel 4 was brand new, and they had shows like No Problem and Black on Black. Or there was a time on the BBC when Janet Street Porter had a few hours that she would control, when they had things like The Real McCoy. And in that window of time, there was stuff that you could relate to, But that seemed like a really small window, and it quickly went out of flavour, and then there's been nothing since. Yeah. So obviously there's been more and more black faces on the TV over the years presenting shows and whatever, but no one who comes from where I come from and talks like me. Yeah. They're all ex-university students, and I never went to college, I never went to uni, but I was always ambitious and hard-working and forward-thinking. So, yeah, no one. There was no one, really. I still can't truthfully say there's that many people like me on TV now.
Fair enough. And, you're a busy guy, but do you get a chance to watch TV now? And if so, what do you watch? Not Love Island.
Oh, no. No, I'm lying. I watched the first series and I thought it was really good, but I don't watch it now. I watch a lot of Netflix, so I can just pick what I want to watch when I want to watch. And then, I'm a dad, so I wake up in the morning, I do the school run every day, and then I come home, I'll have a bit of breakfast and usually watch Holmes Under the Hammer. That's one of my favourite.
Holmes Under the Hammer.
That's one of my favourite shows. I love that show.
World exclusive.
Yeah, I love that show. I find it very entertaining, yeah.
There you go, Sheffield. You have it. Rodney P watches Holmes Under the Hammer.
Yeah, Holmes Under the Hammer is my thing.
Okay.
Shh, that's between us, yeah. I'm knocking off my cool points, yeah.
So, Jaimie, you're creative director of Acme. You probably could have gone to any channel or larger production company. So what made you want to set up your own independent?
I don't know. I think you have to be in charge of your, I guess, if you want to tell stories that are quite hard to tell, then you can't really go around asking others to let you tell them. So if you start your own company, you've at least got a shot, I guess, is the straightforward answer. But I think that...
what are the frustrations with that? Because when you...
Yeah, I mean, I guess, to be really honest, it is difficult because I feel that the stories that, I don't feel I've got like an amazing story that I want to tell, but I feel like I'm very privileged to have very good access to people who do have amazing stories to tell, and talent, and communities. So it's having the access and I guess the kind of, and in some ways the trust, because I think one of the problems with representing stories that aren't told is that when your story isn't told and you're not represented, someone turns up and says, "Hi, I'm from Channel 4," or "Hi, I'm from the BBC," you're going to instinctively you're going to distrust them. And I've encountered that personally, like so many times whilst making films. And it's in a way, you get people say, "How do I know?" You say I can trust you, but like there's going to be someone above you who's going to be able to, and actually, if you're running the company, you say, "No, it's me." It's like you can trust me, and if you don't like it, you know where we are. This is our address. Here's my card. Here's my mobile, and it just means that I think if you're more in control of the production process, then that's really good in terms of getting the access and the trust. It doesn't necessarily, you still then have to negotiate with the channels. So I guess having that platform, and I'm fortunate that having been around for a little while, I've got, really good relationships with, particular commissioning editors. But it's always a negotiation because I guess, we're increasingly, living in a culturally risk-averse time, and people can't afford to take risks. And if something works, then everyone wants to do the thing that works more. And there's not really much of an advantage in taking risks or telling stories that feel like, well, we're not sure because no one's told that yet, so we don't know it's going to work. And I totally understand that. But what I try to do as a company is I try to. I think what Acme does is we try to tell stories that feel like they haven't been told before, but we try and tell them in a very mainstream way. I mean, that's kind of our job. Yeah. Because one of the things I learned from running Touch, where we really were, we had no one behind us, so if we couldn't sell advertising, or people didn't read the magazine, we didn't have a magazine. So you learned very early on that you could tell a serious story. It might be a political story, a culture story, but you dress it up. And the kind of the Trojan horse is my kind of go-to model in whether I'm pitching a documentary to Channel 4 or the BBC. Or to any of the other channels, or or whatever. I mean, whatever you do in life, I think you have to make it sugar the pill, as Rodney would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And would you say there's a sort of, like you have brand values at Acme? Because you make certain types of documentaries, and does that fit into your sort of ethos as a company? Yeah,
I think so, because I think, it's like the huge growth of the independent sector, I don't know what the figures are, but I'm competing every day and every week and every month with an increasingly large number of other suppliers if I'm pitching to the channels, and probably definitely 9 times out of 10 they will be bigger than me, have bigger resources, probably stronger relationships. So in a way there's no point, I mean, all I can do is offer something that feels a little bit distinctive, and I guess my hope is that, in terms of Acme as a company, that whereas 10 years ago or 5 years ago, people weren't that interested in the kind of things I'm interested in, I sort of hope and sense that there's a bit more of an interest. Even just things like, the Big Nasty Show on Channel 4, which is proper mainstream entertainment. You know, it's not hidden away. It's not around the corner. It's you know, it's what Chris Evans would have been 20 years ago. So I just think there, you know, the world is opening up, and you know, I guess for me as a company, and it isn't particularly, you know, because I did start off in the particularly having strong relationships within the black music world, but to me that is just one entry point into all sorts of things, which is just about life. And you know, I mean, we made a film about Mark Duggan a couple of years ago, which went on BBC One, which I was really proud that we got a controversial story on. It went out at 8:30 on you know, on BBC One, and it was a difficult film in terms of, you know, the questions it was asking. But so I think our brand is that we kind of try and tell stories that feel big, but with a different entry point.
I think it's something about authenticity as well. I think a lot of the documentaries you produce are authentic, and music fans can, particularly your music documentaries, can look at them and, you know, say that, you know, this is something that they would watch. And you've got an amazing track record. You did a documentary for Channel 4, which got a lot of critical acclaim, which was the Jay-Z versus Kanye, and had a really large audience share amongst BAME, black and ethnic minorities, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, no, and it was interesting because it was a specialist factual commission, so it meant that we were able to handle, you know, this kind of epic story of two of the biggest names on the planet and treat them as genuinely interesting artists, but also, you know, people that represent, you know, the kind of the dichotomy of everything in America, whether it's, you know, the politics, the cultural split, you know, even Trump and Clinton, and because we were able to tell it that way, it just feels. I mean, one thing I will say about music documentaries, which there is a shocking lack of on television, and it is cyclical because they don't rate, and it is true they don't rate. Music documentaries, nobody watches them, but then because nobody watches them, nobody wants to commission them, and I guess you're stuck in that loop. But then I guess, you know, hopefully things like Defiant Ones,
yeah,
and even like Hip Hop Evolution, but things that can happen outside of television, hopefully might open up the doors a bit more. But it is difficult with music documentaries because they do, you know, people like watching, listening to music, but they don't necessarily want to watch a film about it.
And I think we've got a little clip of Public Enemy's Jay-Z versus Kanye. So Jaimie, is it hard to get stuff commissioned with new talent?
Yes, for obvious reasons. You know, as I said, it's a risk, isn't it, working with new talent? I think what's been really exciting working with Rodney is that Rodney brings expertise, passion, knowledge, access, all the things that you know, which on their own aren't enough, but then with the right mix of that, and you know, Rodney's obviously, I mean, it comes with being a rapper, doesn't it? You know, people always ask, you know, how come so many rappers are such good actors? It's like, well, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? To be a rapper, to survive as a rapper, it's a bit like being a stand-up comic, I imagine. You've had to get through so many levels that, you know, you're going to be good at speaking in public and getting your point of view across. So yeah, it's I think, you know, yeah, hip hop's a good go-to place for new talent. But I think for anyone, you know, looking for who is that person that's going to front that documentary or present, or even come up with the idea that's going to be that documentary, which I think is even much more interesting, that you can go to people that already bring a constituency, they've already got a fan base, and, you know, if it turned out that in the unlikely event that Rodney was fascinated by stamp collecting, I'm sure we'd make a great stamp.
Make it very.
Well, he watches Homes Under the Hammer, so you,
yeah, there we go. That's our next film should be, you know.
Yeah. And Rodney, you were, well, I don't think you're new talent anymore, but you were a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So what made you?
I was emerging talent.
Emerging talent.
Yeah, 30 years in, I was emerging talent.
What made you want to work with Acme and Jaimie?
Again, really, it was Jaimie. It was Jaimie, and Jaimie making me feel comfortable and giving me the confidence to do it, you know, and also the nature of the stories that he wanted to tell. I already felt passionate about telling those stories. I felt like we needed to tell those stories, and I really trusted him. Yeah. Like, I was a big fan of Touch magazine. When you see all of those covers, I had all of those magazines. Yeah. I was not shoplifting in WH Smith's. I would buy them, but I was already a big fan. So, you know, when the invitation was extended, I was more than happy to do it. And like I say, I had already had a desire to get into the field. I just had no clue how you would do that, you know. So, yeah, it was very much Jaimie was a part of it, absolutely. And I mean, when I first came in and met the team and realised that they, like Melvin was there those times. He was someone I knew from the hip hop scene, you know. So I was very much, I felt like I was amongst friends and telling stories that we all related to, that we all felt were important. So it was easy for me.
And you were saying that those stories are really important to you. What are the challenges of telling those stories and other people don't know about them? So you have this intrinsic, innate sort of drive to tell these stories, but why should the other people care? Yeah,
I mean, it's about as Jaimie was saying, we've got to make them as informative but also entertaining as possible, you know. So it feels to me like a lot of the time the documentaries that we've done are really directed at Middle England and trying to tell them, you know, explain what this thing that they've never heard of is about and why it's so important, why they need to listen to this story. And I'd like to think we've done a good job at that, you know. I don't think, you know, people outside of the community really knew about pirate radio or knew about grime being more than just these angry kids shouting in the mic, that actually these kids have opinions and they're political and, you know, all this other stuff that comes with it. I don't think people were aware. So it was about telling those stories, having people who have never listened to those stories before be entertained by those stories. Yeah. You know, so it's not easy. I'll tell you the truth, it's not easy, but I do feel like we do a halfway decent job.
And the pirate radio one, again, critical acclaim, really educated people about the origins of pirate radio. And again, we're going to grace you lot with a clip of that so you can see. Brilliant. And Jaimie, can you just, you know, go into a little bit more detail and depth about the importance of social history?
You know, I mean, social history. Yeah. I mean, that the importance of that film to me is it was really personal to me because I for many years had been pitching to various people at various channels the idea of doing a film about pirate radio. And I just couldn't believe it was so interesting was that then like no one I was pitching had ever heard of it. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, you know, like for me, and I'm probably for most people that I know, pirate radio was the radio. It was, we didn't call it pirate radio, it was just the radio in the 80s because that's where all the good music was. And it was really interesting that, I guess it's about cultural norms, isn't it? It's about, you know, your own cultural references, which I guess is, you know, of course that's going to influence your commissioning decisions or, you know, how you see the world. And I thought it was really interesting that something that was to me a really important story. And it's a bit like, I think you were asking, you know, like how do you know what an important story is? And fundamentally, you don't. You have to go on your instinct and your own passions and hope you can tell it in a good enough way. But because pirate radio was so huge, I mean, it was you know, at one point famously, well, clearly not famously enough for three guys pitching too, but famously for when we were when pirate radio was huge in the 80s, was that it was so big that the government was like on a mission. It was on a mission to close pirate radio down. And it's such a brilliant story. You got you got the Thatcherite government who are promoting a entrepreneurial, self-reliant agenda, and you've got these kids that are doing that but breaking the law and getting chased around on the rooftops. And you've got amazing music, and you've got great characters. The guy with the leather cap in that clip, he's called Zach, and he's infamous. He ran the biggest station, which was called LWR, and we were really proud because he had never been in a doc. He was once in a doc in the 80s, and he hated it so much he'd never spoken to anyone since in front on camera. So getting him was a real coup. And the important thing, the reason I mention that is that if you know about pirate radio, and if you watch that film, you would go, oh, at last, someone's telling that story. And they got Zach in it. Yeah. It would be obvious. If I watched that film, I would say, why is Zach in it? But because you're trying to make it's almost like you're trying to make it in a vacuum. But I guess my benchmark, and I think probably a lot of people's benchmark for creative work, is that if you can make something that the people that know that world say, yes, that's right, they know what they're talking about. Yeah. But also, and probably as importantly, perhaps more importantly, people have never heard that story go, oh, that's actually really interesting. Then I think job's done, isn't it? So in that case, for example, that was commissioned by Emma Cusack at BBC4, and the controller of BBC4, Kathleen Harrison. They didn't know that story at all, but they were really interested in it, and so it was a really well received at the channel, because we're telling a story that feels niche and untold, but actually it is about it's a different way of looking at Britain in the 80s. And so social history, I think, is probably one of the most valuable resources that we all have, because everyone relates to it, you know, even if it's just from a nostalgia, even if you don't, it's not reflecting your own experience, there is that extra level of nostalgia that it brings to it. There's an extra level of value. And I think, probably most of the films we make, I always like to kind of put some kind of element of, it tells us something not just about now, but, you know, where we came from and how this story happened.
Particularly with Hip Hop World News, because my education of hip hop was through Rodney and the pages of Touch. And we were very fortunate, all three of us, a few years ago, very lucky to work on Hip Hop World News, which some of you guys might have seen. But this next clip we're going to show is, I think it's a bit more personal to Rodney than to Jaimie or myself.
Wow. Yeah, I might need a tissue for that one. I have my bandana.
Yeah. Anyone needs a tissue in your
Wow.
I was going to ask some really kind of silly questions, like what was it like meeting your heroes and working on that documentary? But I think that clip says it all. And you know, to be on that journey and to have been part of that film, very grateful for. But what was it like meeting your heroes, Rodney?
It was a blessing, actually. It was a blessing, and like I say, I was so grateful. You know, I was so grateful. Up until that point, again, it's like I say in that clip. I don't think people really understood how important hip hop had been in the lives of people like me. You know, and it wasn't just, again, these angry kids shouting and, you know, all this bravado. You know, it was an education. It was an education, and it was a way for us to feel proud about who we were. And I'm talking about hip hop as a culture, and not just rap music. You know, now the light is shone on rap music, and the cultural elements of it are kind of been separated. But it was a cultural thing. It was all of the elements and the positivity that we got. Like, I didn't grow up with a father in my house, you know. And as I say there, Chuck D being one of the most important men in my life, he's the guy who sent me to the library, said, go and read this book, go and gather this information. And he was the guy who I was willing to hear that from, you know. And hip hop did that. Hip hop really did that. So, you know, I recognize the value of those voices more than just on a commercial level of let's sell as many records as possible. Actually, they were giving us a lot more than just commerce. They were giving us, you know, self-reliance and yeah, I'm a man. I don't burst into tears.
Okay. Yeah. Let me switch to Jaimie.
You know, I have to really salute Rodney for that, because I mean that was such a moment, and we were in that. What was it, like a garage or something? Like,
yeah, we were in the garage of Chuck Lee's mum's house. Yeah. And he was actually in the next room. And I was remembering in that moment, like, it was almost like I'd forgot. Like, this, like, Chuck D, like, Public Enemy had been, like, 20 years previously. And I had forgotten how much it had meant. And in that moment, it was all coming back to me, and it came back to me in a flood. And again, I'll say on there, these are happy tears. I felt so overwhelmingly blessed to be in that space and able to tell that story and able to tell people just how important it was, you know. And I do remember afterwards Jaimie saying to me, you know, how do you feel about that being in the doc? And I was absolutely like, yeah, it has to be in, it has to stay in. I know there's a level of embarrassment that I feel, and I felt it just now. I feel a level of embarrassment. I'm a big grown man crying on the TV. But actually, I hope what you get from that is just how much it meant to not just me individually, but to a whole generation. You know, I can introduce you to lots of people who felt exactly like I felt in that moment.
Yeah.
And also, just to add to that, I think it's really important as well, because I don't think black men are seen on television to be vulnerable and to be emotional and to be open to, you know, an intellectual experience. And I think actually it was very brave of Rodney to, obviously we talked about it, and it is a very...
I feel like he would have put it in anyway, no matter what I said. But I was happy for him to put it in.
He consulted you before. Yeah. No, you're right, Jaimie. And still on this subject, how did you then convince, because it's important to us, but how do you go into a commissioner at BBC4 and say, make this documentary about hip-hop?
Well, hip-hop's really old, isn't it? Like, it's really weird, and like Rodney said something there is an almost, I've never quite understood, there's like an automatic assumption that if it's hip-hop related, it must be for kids. But hip-hop is older now than rock and roll was when hip-hop came out.
Yeah.
So if you're running a channel which is aimed at, you know, mainly men in their 50s who are into music, and you're not representing hip-hop, you must be getting something wrong, because anyone under 60s can have grown up on hip-hop now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to be 30.
I'm assuming there's lots of those people in this room, grown folks who like hip-hop music.
So,
and women, absolutely.
Anyone.
So yeah, I mean, I think again, it was, you know, and it was great with Cassian, who runs BBC4. He really responds to and Emma, who's the commissioner editor, is very good at kind of brokering. Basically, what Cassian wants is an intellectual argument to show to commission a film, and you know, and it's important on that channel. And actually, it's not that we convinced him, but we just showed that there was a really important. And the film's called The Hip Hop World News, and the idea was that if you look at the last 40 years of world history, if you look at religion, education, the police, war, you know, take the big topics and imagine the only lens you have to look at them is hip-hop, then that's going to give you an interesting and different and perhaps nuanced view of the world that might even be interesting to people who don't think they're interested in hip-hop, which goes back to something I said earlier. But I do think it's really important that you bring people into the tent rather than just entertain the people who are already interested. Yeah. So yeah, it is a battle, because I think, you know, there is that assumption that you know, certain cultures or certain types of music cannot, you know, that they're shallow, and they're not. We know they're not.
Yeah. And for those of you just saying about hip hop, those who like hip hop, I need to get the plug in now before I forget. We're having a party tomorrow.
Yay! Big
There'll
party
be plenty
tomorrow.
of old school hip hop. Yeah, more about that later. But so the most recent Rodney P doc is Beats, Bass and Bars, and that's the story of grime, which is born of hip hop, that we believe, well I believe, and we are going to have a look at that. So we were talking earlier, Ronnie, and I think that it's gone from, particularly in the UK, from hip hop to grime. How's the hip hop scene changed since you started?
Changed a hell of a lot. It's changed. Like I said, there's separation between hip hop and rap. The culture has changed. But I would just like to say that for me, and I have this conversation and this argument with both sides, the grime kids and the old school hip hop guys. For me, grime is the embodiment of what hip hop sounds like in the UK. Yeah. You know, I think if you're being honest about how you approach this music, grime is a bit of jungle and a bit of garage and a bit of reggae and a bit of hip-hop, and it's all thrown into the melting pot and stirred up like a gumbo. And that's what hip-hop's supposed to be. That's the mentality of hip-hop from the outset. So for me, grime is the purest form of hip-hop that's ever come out of the UK. And some may agree, some may disagree, but that's my opinion. But it's definitely changed. It's definitely changed. Rap music is now a commercial success in the UK. You have these young grime kids, these young trap music kids, these young drill kids who are doing it now, who again are still perceived as being negative forces and negative energy. But there is also in the UK a really progressive and creative underground who are making incredible music right now, but that doesn't necessarily get the commercial light shone on it, you know? But it still exists and it's still powerful. And then also, I have to say, using the technology for one, using the new technology that didn't exist when we first come out. These young people have been able to take control of their own destinies.
Yeah.
They don't chase after record companies in the way that we had to get our product out. These guys are doing it for themselves, and a lot of them, they are what they represent. These are kids who are on the road, keeping up all kind of antics, may not have necessarily been leading the best lives, who managed to turn that hustle and apply it to music and make it work for themselves. That's a beautiful thing. It's like Margaret Thatcher was saying, as Jaimie mentioned, you know, that entrepreneurial spirit is to be celebrated. It's to be celebrated. These guys have taken themselves out of sometimes very negative and bad positions and able to become mini moguls here in the UK. People like Skepta and Stormzy and Wiley. These are guys who are doing amazing work, incredible work, and helping newer, younger artists come up behind them and do more of the same. So whether you're a fan of the music in and of itself and how it sounds, you still have to celebrate these young men for taking the opportunities that they have and making it work for themselves.
Cool.
Well said, Rodney.
And Jaimie, that was another BBC4 documentary.
Yeah, yeah.
How did they?
Well, again,
that?
Grime's old, isn't it? Grime's been around for 15 years. 2002, 2003.
I think that's your pitch when you go into commissioners.
I just tell them,
this is old.
It's not
Commission
new,
it.
It's not dangerous. It's not risky. It's not.
Yeah.
It's old.
Yeah.
But also, I think how we sort of presented it was that, you know, there's been quite a lot of really good films about grime. I think the guys are here who I saw a short film last night about Storming MC.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, rest in peace. There's been films on Noisy. There's been films on various platforms. But what we wanted to do was show the story, you know, the lineage. And for me, when I remember when grime first came out, I remember being in record shops, specifically talking to the guy. We'd be talking about some new track we were interested in, and there were all these kids kept coming in and getting this very strange music that was really brand new, and that was years ago. So we want to show in this film that grime didn't just emerge fully formed. It comes from us. There's a big story behind it, and actually telling it in the context of sound system culture, jungle, drum and bass, UKG, you know, kind of presenting it in that way. Interestingly, not only does it make it more interesting for a BBC4 audience or a mainstream television audience, which hopefully it does, it's also quite interesting for the kids, you know, the grime kids now who are 18 or maybe a bit older than that, but that they are not told their own story. Even with Hip Hop World News, we did, do you remember the screening at the BBC? They did this thing called, I've never heard of it, it's called an influencer screening. That they did, so basically they got some kids to come watch it.
They're young.
So that they would like tweet about it or whatever. But what was really funny was that they were like young, they were like probably 25 and under. And it was really interesting when we were watching it with, you know, maybe 50 of these young viewers, and it's really interesting that they didn't know the story of hip hop because it's not told, you know, it's not actually told. It's a bit like we've almost come full circle, so we have to create our own media again. And I do think that, you know, the mainstream broadcasters are in a difficult position because everything is being squeezed in the middle and the ratings aren't there and people don't feel that they can take a risk. I mean, what I try and do, and it's a hard argument, but what I try and often have the argument about is that by taking the risk you might get the reward. And again, going back to the Jay-Z Kanye film, which was did very, very well and got really good numbers, it just sort of shows that because it feels like a story from the outside, it doesn't mean it is. And Jay-Z and Kanye are two of the biggest names on the planet, so it shouldn't be a risk.
Audience, we're going to be coming to you guys very shortly, so start to think about your questions. But before we do, Rodney, what's up next for you then?
What's up next?
Yeah.
I've got an album coming out later this year. I ain't put out an album for years, but I do have an album coming out later this year. It's actually finished. I've finished recording it. So look out for that. And in terms of what we're doing TV-wise, I'm going to hand that over to Jaimie. We do have something in the pipeline, but
you know. Talk about it?
It's
early days, so we haven't quite worked it out, but we're basically doing a film about it's about the British jazz funk movement.
Yeah.
with Rodney,
Yeah.
which I think would be interesting actually for both of us, because it's probably the least, it's something you don't have a direct experience of.
Yeah.
And again, as talent, as documentary talent, one of the things I want to do with Rodney is take Rodney out of what I call, in a good way, the ghetto of music, because I think people do get siloed, and I think in other genres, people who are known for one thing can then be doing a travelogue or a car program or a food show. Or I'm not necessarily
I would say something that I do want to do is a kind of travelogue show. If there's any commissioners here, right, I'd love to do a travel show. I mean, and I say that because I just recently came back from India, and I didn't go with any preconceived notions about what I would find, but what I found there was amazing. And it was a story that I've never heard before, and stories that I'm sure even young Indian kids in the UK haven't heard before, about how vibrant and creative the music scene is over there. I was working with amazing artists that I would have never come across unless I was there. Yeah. You have to go there to see how progressive it really is. And there's things like, I've been to Australia, and right now in Australia, drill music is the thing. And very much influenced by the UK drill rather than the American and Chicago drill. And I'm curious to know why. Why? It's we still have the impression here of Australia as neighbours and Bondi Beach. So why are these Australian kids making drill music and being so passionate about it? I think those are questions that are worth asking and worth digging into.
Drill Down Under.
Drill Down, we have the title.
Drill Down Under.
There you go. There you go.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we just join me in thanking Jaimie and Rodney for a really great chat.
Thank you, Lawrence.
We're gonna open it up to the audience now. There's going to be two people. Can you wait till a microphone comes to you? You can introduce yourself if you want, and then whoever the question's directed at. We've got 15 minutes, so if you wait for a mic.
Wow, lots of hands. We were told that usually people are a bit shy about asking questions. It's good to see.
So when the mic gets to you, gentleman there with his hand up.
Yeah, Rodney. It's Derek here.
Derek, how you doing, brother?
Yeah, I'm good. So a question you asked earlier at the beginning and came up a couple of times is how you got into making films, in particular doing documentary, because this is a documentary festival. Yeah. But it's interesting you ended on your pitch for doing travelogues, because I'm wondering how much a particular area of your work that actually got me into podcasts long before people started talking about it in the last 3 to 5 years, back in 2004, 2005, the very first podcast I downloaded was the work that you did for One Extra, looking at
South Africa.
South Africa and all of that work. So it feels to me like it felt to me, and I think we might have even spoken about this in 2006 when I got you to do something at Rich Mix, that it felt to me that your journey towards being a documentary maker began there. I'm just wondering if...
Yeah, you know what, I actually apologise. I didn't actually bring up I was one of the first DJs, the first group of DJs that were on One Extra. And again, like I said, I always had a passion for telling these stories. So I guess in a big way, that was part of it. That wasn't TV docs, that was radio docs. But it was still about the same thing, telling these other stories that people weren't really hearing. And we went to South Africa and we kind of immersed ourselves in the music and society. And in a lot of ways, that was the first stepping stone for me. And I'm grateful to the BBC again for giving me that opportunity. I'm not sure what it is that they saw in me, why I got the job. I guess it's because I already had a passion about doing it. But yeah, I'm grateful. And definitely that would have been the first places where I started having the opportunity to kind of dig at these stories, for sure.
Thank you, Derek.
Thanks for the reminder, bro.
Gentleman at the back in the check shirt, and then there's a gentleman there after with his hand up. After that, yeah.
Hi there, guys. Just thanks for all the projects you've been doing. As a old school b-boy myself, I can say that, and white lower middle class person from Bournemouth, it hit us hard as well. Like, the thing about hip hop, I think that people don't understand, is that it's completely skills based, and so it transcends, and it's about battling. So, you know, you step into a cypher and either you're good or you're shit, and you'll come out that way. But afterwards, a conversation happens, and that transcends all these bullshit barriers that are put on us. And I'd just like to thank you for putting that usually unseen aspect of hip hop culture across, because that's what keeps me loving it. Yeah. Like 30 odd years later, you know. Yeah. Yeah. So
there's a real sense of community within the hip hop community. Like, if you're part of this, it is very much family. And even in the early days, like 1985, 1986, crews from London were traveling all over the country. Crews from all over the country were coming to London and battling, but then also socializing and finding an understanding of how each of us live and coming from these different places. And that still exists today, that sense of community. And feeling like outsiders in a lot of way. We were outsiders and forced together. And those bonds that we made, I've got friends from all over this country, all over the world, who I know through hip-hop. Hip-hop culture has created an alternative family for me and lots of other hip-hop fans, for sure.
Nice one.
Thank you. And gentleman there, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is Rodney. So with Scar, I know you've done a lot of work with Dub Pistols as well. You see that probably as a way of, that doesn't really have as much of an agenda, as much weight as grime and hip hop do have, don't they? But I was thinking like about how you can, as an artist yourself, you are able to encompass the whole spectrum of what you do. You know, you have a message, and also you want to have fun.
Yeah, I do a bit
some
of both,
people as well, like when they're so laser directed towards something. Like, can you comment on that? Like,
again, it was like I said, when we first started out and doing this London Posse stuff, it wasn't universally accepted. You know, the hip hop kids were a bit dismissive of us because we didn't sound American. But I grew up in a time when the specials and the beat and madness were on top of the pops, and I loved that stuff. And those audiences were very welcoming to us in the early days because they had an understanding of how we used the language and the accent in the music. So I've never really felt trapped in creatively, like hip-hop has to be exactly like this and there's no room for anything else. I've always felt like hip-hop is the gumbo. It's a little bit of everything. And if we're going to do it coming from the UK, we have to use the influences that we had growing up and Scar and that attitude, you know, was always going to be part of the music. And because it's part of who I am. Yeah.
Thank you. There was someone who had their hands up there at the back, if you can get the mic.
And big up my Dub Pistol fans inside, they're done now.
Hi, my name is Igoma. I'm from Lagos, Nigeria. I wanted to, thank you very much for this panel. Thanks for crying as well. I have one comment and one invitation. So the travelogue idea, I don't know if you've been to Nigeria and what your thoughts are on Afrobeats and the Nigerian, sort of urban music culture, people like Fela. I would love for you to take Nigeria as your next country to explore musically, because there's interesting things there. And secondly, where's the hip hop party tomorrow?
Well, the first part, I haven't been to Nigeria actually. I've been to many places in Africa. My mum actually owns a house in Gambia, so I go there quite often. And I've been to South Africa and Uganda and Mali. I've been to a few places and seen how the culture works there. I'm a fan of Afrobeats. As a raver, and that's fantastic party music. But I would definitely love to be able to dig down a bit deeper into that. I know in the UK it's having a huge effect. And traditionally in the UK, growing up, the black community was seen as mostly West Indian and Caribbean. And now African cultures are very much taken a hold. And that's a beautiful and a powerful thing. So I'd definitely love to dig down into that story a bit more. And the party tomorrow is in Deaners, so I hope to see you there.
We've got time for probably
there are flyers here for the party.
Yeah, they're actually flyers. We'll have some people handing out flyers for the party later. And everybody is invited, and it's going to be a hell of a party, so don't miss out on that.
Rodney P's guest list.
Yeah, you're all on my guest list. And I'm going to be doing a bit of rapping there as well, so you get to see me with my other hat on.
Yeah. So I think we can probably squeeze in 3 if we're quick, so the lady there at the end. And if you have your hand up ready, because there's another mic, we can just keep it moving. Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Lady there, yeah.
Hiya, I'm Tamara, and this is
doing,
with Jaimie. Hiya. You mentioned that you have access to, people that have good stories to tell, and that what really struck there was that you have their trust. What is it that you do, or what is it Acme does that's different to other production companies or broadcasters that allows you to establish that trust?
Good question.
Yeah, it's probably to do with, to be honest, with longevity. Because if you've built up a track record, then that helps you. You can show people that that other people have trusted you to tell their stories. But also, it's, like for example, in the Grime film, I found that I actually knew quite a lot of the people that we needed to be in the film. I sort of know their dads. And it's weird if you say to I have actually said to people like a Grime artist, I'll be like, just ask your dad if they know about touch. And they'll be like, all right, and then they're like, yeah, you're right, you're cool. It's by no means any magic formula. It's just about doing things that I guess mean something to you and doing them consistently, and then I guess building that. But of course, as as I'm sure everyone would know, it's a very precious thing that you can't squander that. It's very important that you do honour people's. You never want to give the idea that you're just going to tell their story regardless, because you have to be critical and have editorial judgment. But it's just getting in the door. It's just getting there. And I just think for a lot of people, the door's not open because they don't trust people from telly. So.
We had one question. Someone's got the mic, and then one more. We've got time for one more after. So if you, person at the back there, that'll be the last one. Make it a good one.
Yeah, my question is for Rodney.
Yeah.
You briefly mentioned your thoughts on the drill music scene and the negative kind of associations with hip-hop. I just wanted to ask you what your opinions are of how the hip-hop scene has possibly affected the black culture, especially with a lot of promotion of violence and gang activity and discrimination of women.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? How do you think that has affected the black community?
Good and bad. But I do think a big part of the problem for me personally as an elder is the way that the spotlight is shone on one particular part of the music. Like, I think the fact that drill now sucks up all of the energy, sucks up all of the airtime.
Do you think that there is a valued correlation between the popularity of drill music and the rising...
You know what, I would say, and again, I have this argument, and people often try to fight me down for it. But I've said before that Public Enemy helped shape the direction of my life. That music was more than just music. It meant so much to me. And a lot of the negative stuff that I was into at the time, it helped steer me away from that. So I think if music can have a positive effect like it did on me, it can also have a negative effect. And I do feel like, sometimes this drill stuff is so powerfully negative that it can be problematic. But again, I feel as though if the light was shone wider, it wasn't just being shone on this one spot all the time, and that young people could see the diversity within hip-hop. That people like Santan Dave and Laurel Kana and Akala, and there's so many different facets to this hip-hop music, I think it would be much healthier. The fact that it's this trap, drill, nigga, I think it's problematic, yeah.
Last question.
That ain't a popular answer, but it's my truthful one. Right.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Reba, and I wanted to ask about music documentaries, and you're saying that you found it hard to get commissions on the BBC and TV, and what you see happening next for it, and how the internet's kind of affected that. Now there's more platforms to produce and get these documentaries shown. not very well formed.
That's me.
Whoever wants to.
One of the things I think is really strange is that the more platforms there are, the less choice there is. And it seems like the most counterintuitive thing. But if there are 100 channels, then because they're all basically chasing the same finite group of human beings, they've kind of got to do stuff that's quite in the middle. And I think that although it's really good, and I think generationally, no question, absolutely, if you're 17 now, or 25 now, but definitely teenagers now, they're just making amazing documentaries on their own. They don't need any permission, they don't know, they've never heard of a release form, they don't license anything. But some of the films they make are incredible. I mean, you know, there's some amazing stuff we made. And that's great, I guess, and then some of them will pop. You know, you might get a film that will get 1 million views or 2 million views on YouTube. And you might get a story like Shiro's story, which has obviously been picked up and become massive. And that's amazing. That's not a documentary, but the point I'm making is that someone made it without permission on YouTube. But I do think that, well, frankly, I think that the broadcasters kind of quite often will use that as an excuse to not empower or commission people to tell their story in the mainstream. And one of the things that many, many years ago, when I very first started pitching ideas, I was constantly told, oh, don't worry, there's this new thing called cable TV. Just go and do it on cable. And I remember at the time thinking, I don't want to be on cable, I want to be on BBC One and Channel 4, because these stories are really important. And I guess having that, I mean, it was maybe a slightly, you know, it was, I didn't necessarily, I don't know why I had that ability to say that, or felt that I was entitled to say that, but I did feel that, I sort of feel we all sort of belong in the middle. You know, everyone feels they belong. No one thinks, oh, I'm a marginal outsider and I want to go and tell my story over here. So I think the fact that there is a lot of outlets is brilliant, but it also, I think it comes with an obligation on the people in power to look at what's going on over there and then give something to those people who are demonstrating that they can bring an audience, they've got the quality, they've got the ability to produce amazing content.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jaimie. Just want to thank you all for coming. Thank you for your questions, and hopefully see some of you on the dance floor tomorrow.
At dinner.
At dinner.